With the Hospitality Suite by the great Jacques Courcil and Mark Gilmore, performed during the invocations of the project, whose book we are presenting you tonight, Whose Land Have I Lit On Now? Contemplations on of the Notions of Hospitality. We welcome you today, the last day of our quartet of book launches made by Savvy Contemporary and Archive Books. And we invite you to stroll with us through this garden that we have prepared with you, with some readings from contributors and videos reviving the invocations of the project. And within the next hour, we will navigate through the different contemplations on hospitality, hostility, home, homeland, Heimat, and which are the main topics of this book tonight.
Thank you, Raisa. Thanks also for the blessing that we received listening to Jacques Courcil and Mark Gilmore. We thought it was important to start with this note to convoke actually the spirit of Jacques Courcil, who has been accompanied us for years in our researches, in our thoughts, in our musical explorations, and that unfortunately left us some time ago. So we couldn't help but needed to call him back into this virtual space even to do this book launch, because really without him we couldn't have done this project. And we also produced, we were trying to show that before, we produced this vinyl, the Hostipitality Suite, that Jacques did with us. It was the first vinyl of our Savvy label. And it was a philosophical and a musical contribution to this project. So even if it's not coming together with the book, it's a sonic amplification of all the reasoning that are connected to the project. Before starting and listening to Bonaventure introducing his concept, I would like also to make you a little bit familiar with the book, with its content, the way it unfolds. It's actually one of the thickest books that we have done until yet at Savvy Contemporary. Yes, thank you, Raisa, for showing also how it is printed with this beautiful poster and a quote by Olu Ogibe: "There is no love more blind than the one of the country." And as I was saying, the book has been edited not just by Bonaventure and myself, but in particular by our colleague Federica Bueti, that I would like to thank here, as well as, of course, I would like to thank on these last days, that last day of book launches, Chiara Figone and the whole team of Archive Books.
Yes.
Bona is gonna also name all the people that made this project possible and this project materializing also as a book, and in so convoking these spirits that are so important to accompany us. But I would like to mention how the different chapters are unfolding. We start with 4 curatorial texts by Bona, by Denise Reiner, that co-curated the project and was a fundamental sparring partner for the development of it. And then also a text by myself. I will get into that later. The first chapter is entitled Forging a Bridge from Wir schaffen das to Das Boot ist voll. A second chapter is entitled I Guessed, I Host, Who is the Ghost? And the third and last one is Riding the Tide on Hostipitality. So as usual, the books we do at Savvy are never really the illustration of a project, the catalog of an exhibition, but they are further contemplations, further complications even, because we try to carry on the answers, the questions, there was a Freudian slip, the questions that we're trying to bring to the fore with the realization of a project, and to have them become an even bigger questions, and to continue working on that and listening to the chorality of perspectives that we wish to entangle in a project. So I would say, yes, let's move to Bonaventure and we listen to him, and then we continue navigating the garden.
Welcome to the book presentation of Whose Line Have I Lit On Now? Contemplations on the Notions of Hostipitality, which is a project that happened at Savvy Contemporary in 2018, and that manifested itself in the form of an exhibition and a series of what we call invocations. So performances, lectures, dance, and other forms of convocations of spirits. The main issue or question at stake being the issue of hospitality and the interconnectedness between hospitality and hostility. There is a song that goes by the title, "This World Is Not My Home, I'm Just Passing Through." And it is a very important gospel hymn which questions the notion of host and guest. So if we are all just passing through, then who is the host and who is the guest? And I think that was at the core of this project. We use Jacques Derrida's notion of hospitality as a point of departure to think about the world in which we live today, being people that have had to move for one reason or the other and have had to find ourselves in the position of the guests. But the question is, after being in a place for a very long time, does one become a host or does one shift and become directly a ghost? And that is at the core of what we're doing. We were particularly interested also in Germany in particular, Europe at large. It was at a point where we had come out of a serious something that was derogatorily called the migrant crisis, the refugee crisis. And we're considering what it meant for people who had to leave their homes in search of greener pastures, to get into a place like Germany and face the kind of violent, reception. We're also trying to make the historical connection that nobody leaves home for the pleasure of it, and the fact that there was a connectedness between the wars that were being fought in the Middle East, the weapons that were being sent there, the long history of disappropriation that happened in those parts of the world that led to people coming here. So it was important to look at this notion of hospitality, the way it is highly connected to hostility. So we invited a couple of friends, Denise Reiner as co-curator of the project, Elena Agudio as co-curator of the project, and philosophers Silwa Luz Bulbina, scholars Bill Ginayata, Arjuna Padorai, Margarita Tuomo, and many artists, Naim Mohamed, Ulf Aminde, and Mariam Shikla, Ibrahim Aslan, Massimo Perinelli, Fakonde Sharudi, Tanya Willard, Peter Morin, the great Jacques Ozil, Safar Sinclair, Jihan Eltari, Raisa Galofre, Joshua Chambers Letson, Mohamed Amjahid, Lionel Manga are contributors to this book.
After having listened to Bonaventure, yes, I find you again. You're back at the front, let's say the beginning of the garden of this labyrinth, because we easily get lost. And I would like to also recall the steps that brought us to conceive this project in 2018. I mean, it was conceived in 2017, and then it took, of course, a while, the phase of the research, the phase of the discussions with the artists and all the people involved, and then the exhibition that happened, of course, with a very large discursive platform that what we call the invocations, and that was stemming from the necessity of confronting the concept and the practices of hospitality in the contemporary times, our contemporary times of hatred and resentment, xenophobia, and violence. So we actually reacted already when in 2015, that article by Dirk Schumer was published in Die Welt under the title Europa ist eine Festung und muss das auch bleiben. So it was saying that Europe is and must stay a fortress. I think that, of course, even today in 2021, we are still hearing to be said, even though sometimes after, we also had the impression that this festung, this fortress, has also been a very dangerous place. And now we are understanding that in this time of pandemic, when it's the whole demos pandemic that is put in at the same level, and the asymmetries of hospitality are becoming even more visible. So in that time, we decided not just to analyze how much hostility is hidden in any practice of hospitality, how much unsettling feelings were hidden behind all the rhetorics of Willkommenskultur, the Gastfreundschaft that in Germany were so visible and present in public discourse. But we also thought of thinking about what it means across culture to be a host and to receive a guest, and understanding how much there are models in which we can really see this unconditional readiness to share. I remember that in the team we were discussing a lot a paper, a text by Julius Gatogo that was talking of different African models and concepts of hospitality, from the Ubuntu to the Teranga, and trying to see what are the main differences between a European rooted on Greek and Latin, Roman ideas of hospitality is and other ones in other parts of the continent. And we did that also because in the etymology of the word hospitality, from the Latin word hospes, we found, as actually Derrida has been doing already some time ago, this interesting ambiguity of hostility and hospitality. So the hospes being both the enemy and the guest. So that, of course, provoked a lot of feelings, a lot of thinking, and allowed us to situate the reflection in those moments. But of course, we also thought about the asymmetries that are coming with curating. So the violence of the curatorial, what it means to hospitalize sometimes instead of hosting the artist, the works, getting rid of maybe the dirt that and the non apt to the white cube aesthetics. And for that reason, we also put a lot of attention in the way we were performing and enacting the project. We were not just talking about hospitality, but of course, analyzing it in its praxis, trying also, of course, to reflect very much self-critically. That's why in the book, I decided to publish a small text that was exactly trying to reflect on these issues and on our position. I mean, in my case, my position also, because my positionality is different, for example, from the one of the other curators, Bonaventure and Denise. And because this is a book launch, we also want to read a little bits of the book here and there. So allow me to read few lines from my text. I start with a quote. I mean, the title is A Matter of Asymmetry on the Violence of the Curatorial and the Geometries of Hospitality. This is not about us, the curators. This is not about what we are or what we do. Instead, this is about what happens between us. What I am interested in is the performative aspect of the word curatorial and what its utterance does to the existing identificatory machine that endlessly consumes us. Sorry, I was a little bit distracted by these very beautiful rays of sun, and maybe these are things that are happening in between us. This was a quote by Ye Yoon Moon. I then add another quote by Anna Tsing, which reads, "Unpredictable encounters transform us. We are not in control even of ourselves. Unable to rely on a stable structure of community, we are thrown into shifting assemblages, which remake us as well as our others." Then, because I just pick up some lines, I hope you will be able to follow. Dust, molecules, and histories interweave in the soil of cemeteries and in the galleries of museums. As architecture of loss and nostalgia, cemeteries build on the material presence of an absence. As architecture of gains and national affirmation, museums mortify objects, displacing them and making their presence as fixed. They host and cleanse, separate and re-territorialize, put thresholds between those who come to visit and those who have to stay. Like keepers and guardians, the column and vitrines of museums bury and entomb, while curatorial practices and contemporary exhibition making may translate into acts of hospitalization. The cold secularism of the white cube and the froid intellectualism on contemporary art medicalize, cleanse, and sanitize objects and epistemologies, taking spectators out of the grim and stress of everyday life. Curatorial practice and its translation in such spaces can neutralize and homogenize these particularities and idiosyncrasies, the dirt and contagion of art. They host, but they also decide about what to include and to exclude. Being selective environments, curatorial editing, thus, etches a line between hospitality and hospitalization that runs thinly, oscillating between obsessions of keeping alive and letting die museums, cemeteries, hospitals, and mental asylum belong to a shifting taxonomy of places of hospitality. This was the beginning of the text, which starts actually with a comparison between cemeteries and museums, also because the space we were occupying before with Savi Contemporary was exactly next to a cemetery. But the text concludes with an invitation to gentleness, and I would like to read that and then leave it to Raisa again. If Derrida claimed that hospitality is being prepared to be unprepared, we wanted to put ourselves further, taking that challenge and being open to even become disoriented, embracing what Anne Dufour-Mantel elaborated as a philosophy of risk and gentleness. In proximity to feminist strategies of weak resistance formulated by Eva Majewska, by which she refers to the non-heroic disobedience performed in the everyday, Dufour-Mantel's Power of Gentleness, Meditations on the Risk of Living, ponders the disruptive power of gentleness and the potential of fragility to subvert and create personal and political change. For her, gentleness is not a diluted form of mawkiness. Rather, in the name of our highest values, happiness through security, we enforce gentle safeguards against harm and are persuaded to participate in our era's three divinities: efficiency, speed, profitability. By doing so, we seal ourselves off from the life-affirming gamble that a true gentleness affords. End of quote. And I conclude with, again, my text. Gentleness, Dufour-Mantel suggests, may be considered as an active passivity, a contingent extraordinary force of resistance, and a radical possibility of fully embracing the risk of living, creating and strengthening relationships that implies taking the risk that comes from the vulnerability of human sharing, key to all hospitable encounters. Articulating and unfolding a practice of curatorial hospitality entails embracing and rendering meaningful these ambivalences and paradoxes. In contrast to the hospitalizing imagination of the thresholds of museums and cemetery that separate and immobilize, our exercise on hospitality performed from our gallery space that's situated in a former crematorium and alongside a cemetery, sought to pry open the faux paneling and artificial boundaries of curating and ponder its asymmetric geometries.
Thank you, Elena, for reading part of your text with us and also sharing the context of how came up to do this project on hospitality and all the implications and also the urgency of these topics right now. So yeah, I would like to also share with you part of the text that I wrote and that is also included in the book. I worked as a curatorial assistant during this hospitality exhibition and invocations. So when,
a brilliant
one of the
one. A brilliant one.
Yeah, so one of the things that came to my mind after reading Bonaventure's concept on hospitality, and especially the part of I guest, I host, who's the ghost, was the cumbia music and dance from the Caribbean region of Colombia, where I come from. I immediately thought on that. Also, because in the concept, Bona describes this distortion and this wrenching of the relation between the guest and the host that happens in the context of settler colonialism or in any colonial enterprise. And when the hosts are violently forced to become guests in their own home, in their own land. So it was precisely this context, this hostile context of distortion and violence, where in the colonizations of the Americas and the Caribbean, the cumbia music was born, and was actually born as a form of of expression in this hostile environment that it was, of joy, encounter, also pain and sensuality. So thinking and looking at the cumbia through the lenses of hospitality and put it in the context of this host and guest relation, really expanded my own also understanding of cumbia music, because for example, when we are asked in Barranquilla, in Colombia, where does this music come from, and or how did it was created, how did it was done? We always repeat this description that the cumbia is a mixture of indigenous African and Spanish, So it is always this repetition of this definition. And I felt like it fails really to contextualize the historic context of where or how La Cumbia was created. And so looking through these lenses, it also, through the Hostipitality project, it also allowed me to think La Cumbia as a form of re-existence. When we think of the term by Walter de Mignolo, in a sense that it's not something from the past, is we're living in the present. That's something beautiful about dance, and it brings us to the present, to live and experience the knowledges that couldn't be erased through colonization, and that transcended the context, the regional context where they emerged, where they came together. So for the invocations, we invited Canoa Folk, the Colombian dance group, which is directed by Rocio Club Correa, an amazing dancer from. She is was born in the Caribbean, in the Pacific coast of Colombia, and raised in the Caribbean coast. So she has both influences from both coasts. She is, as she says, doblemente costeña, so from both coasts. So we invited Canoa Folk to perform Rueda de Cumbia during the invocations. And these Rueda de Cumbias are currently also nowadays performed in different neighborhoods around Barranquilla. So it's kind of a dance where the musicians are in the middle, in the center, and the dancers are dancing around them.
Yes, and so you brought them into the room in the Cupolale, so it was not just it was really a presence of bodies. That's why your text is about embodying history and dancing history.
Exactly. Yes. The text, as you said, the title is Dancing and Embodying History, Cumbia as a Form of Re-Existence. This was the introduction text to Canoa Folk. So, if you allow me, I will read a few lines of the text. I will start with a quote from a cumbia song with Adolfo Pacheco, that's called Lamento Sambo. Indio, busca tu palito de cartón. Negro, trae el eco de tu tambor, que ya no viene de España, el recio conquistador, con su velo cargado de humillante sumisión. Solo quedará la gaita y el eco de tu tambor. Before the unexpected guests violently took control over the land in which they had accidentally arrived, the natives of the Caribbean coast of South America hadn't heard the beat of an African drum ever before. The encounter of Native Americans and Africans took place in a space of hostility. It is at the heart of this space that the cumbia music was born. Taking advantage of the hospitality of the indigenous population, who had mixed feelings of curiosity and fear towards them, the Spanish colonizers imposed themselves as the hosts of a land they hardly knew, whereas the actual hosts became ghosts in their own land. Dispossessed, appropriated, subjugated, and almost exterminated in the name of economic and religious power. The Africans, who were violently taken away from the land as slaves to the Americas and the Caribbean by the Europeans, were also strangers to the natives. However, they shared similar feelings of dispossession and loss. Displaced in different ways by brutal forms of violence, because unlikely in spite of this hostility, these ghosts made another home for themselves, a home they could create together and share, a home where the music is the host and to which we all can have access to beyond nationality, race, or religion. It was near the slave settlements on the Caribbean coast of Colombia, in the city of Cartagena, and during their only free day in the year, that indigenous people and Africans used to get together and make music. Dressed in Spanish clothing lent or given away by the colonizers, Africans would play the drums, setting the rhythm, and indigenous people would accompany them with the winds of the flutes. Combining African and indigenous dance movements, this musical dance encounter, this space of joy, sorrow, imagination, and sensuality marks the beginning of what we know as cumbia. So that is the text.
Thank you, Raisa. And this actually brings me back to the other text that I would like to introduce and the other contributor that tonight we will host and feature in this common garden. That is the one of Denise Reiner, that was, as I mentioned before, not only the co-curator, but really the agitator of the project together with Bonaventura as well, and myself. Denise Reiner is director of our gallery in Vancouver, and therefore she actually was not only coming in as a person, but also as an institution. So it was also a partnering between two institutions that are working at the margins, not at the margins in terms of their geographic position, but in terms of the positionality that they perform, being both spaces, Savvy Contemporary and our gallery, spaces that are trying to trouble hegemonic narratives and make very clear how much violence and racism is still present in our societies. So Denise will clarify that in a reading and in a video that we will play now. But what I want to mention is this fundamental link with what Raisa has just been mentioning and reading for, is this reality of dispossession, these realities of taking resources, land, labor from indigenous population, and then building a whole narrative around it and a whole richness by keeping other people subjugated. So I think it will very nicely resonate with your text, Raisa. I also, because we want always to call the names of the people, I want to say that Denise brought many interesting and fundamental contributors to the project, not only in the exhibition with Abbas Akvan Diana Bowen, who showed actually a very important work that is still resonating with us today, that was reflecting on the anti-Greek Negro petition in 1911, who was written and signed by white Canadians to actually push out the Afro-Americans that entered Canada as farmers and they were invited to get this land, and showed the institutionalized discrimination embedded in Canada's founding narratives. But also other people like Stephanie Comilang, Peter Moring, or Tanya Villa, that is also publishing a text in the reader. So we are extremely grateful. Denise, thanks also for being available and being here with us tonight. We give thanks. Let's move to Denise.
Hi, I'm Denise Reiner, Director-Curator of Or Gallery, located on still unceded Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish territories, also known as Vancouver, Canada. Prior to my appointment, I briefly lived and worked in Berlin, where I got to know Savvy and the critical work that they do in that city. Once I started to plan projects at Or Gallery, Savvy was one of the first partners that I reached out to, and of course Bona was already developing the ideas that would become Whose Land Have I Lit On Now? Contemplations on the Notions of Hostipitality. We started by talking about our common experiences and understandings of being members of African and Canadian diasporas in Germany and Canada respectively, and how this intertwined with circulated theory, as well as official narratives positioning guests and hosts in the relationships amongst state, indigenous populations, citizens, non-citizens, and those who were somehow in between. Working from and through our two art spaces and their current sites, one in Europe during the social and political backlash to Willkommenskultur, and what was only the latest episode in a long history of xenophobia, and the other space sited in a settler colonial state that was long overdue in redressing the land claims of its indigenous inhabitants, and which was also networked within varied histories and presences of cultural diasporas. This brought in multiple entanglements that could enrich and complicate discussions of nationalism, settlement, colonialism, migration, expulsion, and foreignness in our exhibition and symposium of 2018. The epigraphs by M. Norbezi Philip and Leanne Berasamosake Simpson that opened my text address these entanglements and relationships and the Canadian context so clearly. Norbezi's poetic tale of Toto Ben and Macy carrying their island nations and cultures within their bodies, following a route long established by the flow of the extracted value of their labor and resources that reaches Canada, where their processions at Caravana, which was what the Caribbean Carnival in Toronto was once known as, continue the call and response between colonial circuits, the North and South, home and home. And Simpson's text on the gap between the promises and actual commitment to reconciliation, the intention to redress the dispossession and injustice that is Canada and the British Crown's history of its treatment of the Indigenous people on Turtle Island. Congratulations to Savvy and Archive Books on bringing this new publication into the world. I'll end by reading an excerpt from my text, Hostile Centers and Hospitable Margins, which touches on how these conversations are threaded through work of one of the artists in that exhibition at Savvy, Abbas Akvan. The artists and scholars who Or Gallery invited to exhibit, perform, and speak in its joint presentation of Hostipitality, Whose Land Have I Lit On Now, with Savvy Contemporary, each address the gestures of hospitality and hostility that are part of the narratives of those who, through colonization and migration, have been dispossessed of their resources, land, bodies, and communities, who then, establishing themselves on their ancestral territory or in networked diasporas, founded their survival on rebuilt home, community, and culture. Artist Abbas Akvan draws on everyday vernacular objects as metonymic stand-ins to complicate the domestic sphere's centrality to our understanding of relationality. Hygiene and cleanliness are particular areas where prohibitions are entangled with acts of care, Akhavan exaggerates the dimensions of the broom, a seemingly universal image of homemaking, and emphasizes its connection to xenophobia and social division. The broom is transformed into a hostile symbol when cleaning up is repeated in the dog whistle campaign slogans of numerous politicians who promise to rid their streets and neighborhoods of othered people, be they immigrants, the homeless, sex workers, or people visibly suffering from drug addiction. The broom leans against the wall, but is poised in the service of an invited guest. The expulsion of an
Raisa.
unwanted one, or the marginalization of
We are
those
back.
deemed other. Furthermore,
And we would
Akvan's
like to
broom is
introduce you
associated with the
to,
maintenance work
yes,
of
the
office cleaners, who are
practices of
often an invisible,
inhospitality,
ghosted, and racialized
and
labor
to
force.
this,
With their
let's
brooms,
say,
they prepare
thread of
spaces for
research
less
that
precarious citizens to
we
work
focus
and live.
on of forging a bridge.
Yeah, so we continue going through the chapters of the book, and we are going to navigate through the chapter of Wir schaffen das, Forging a Bridge, Wir schaffen das, das Boot is full. And as it was important for us as a point of departure for this project to situate ourselves in the geographical and geopolitical context in which we sub-contemporary are, no? That is Germany and Europe, and reflect on the politics and the discourses of hospitality and the so-called Willkommenskultur, that is, or that was especially in 2015, pretty much celebrated in Germany. But after a few months from Wir schaffen das, we can cope with it. It turns to be Das Boot is full. The boat is full. There's no place for anybody. So we invited scholars, artists, to reflect with us on this topic, especially contextual lesson here in Europe. And I would like to read a part of the text by scholar Denise Ferreira da Silva of Inhospitality. It starts with a quote by Immanuel Kant. Since human beings do not, in the pursuit of their endeavors, follow merely their instincts, as do animals, and yet also do not, as would rational citizens of the world, proceed in accordance with a previously arranged plan, it does not seem possible to present a systematic history of them. When confronted with this, one does not know, in the end, how one ought to conceive our species, one so thoroughly conceit about its own superiority. The only option for the philosopher here, since he cannot presuppose that human beings pursue any rational end of their own in their endeavors, is that he attempts to discover an end of nature behind this absurd course of human activity, an end on the basis of which a history could be given of beings that proceed without a plan of their own, but nevertheless according to a definite plan of nature. For 100 years, those arriving in Europe from Asia, the Middle East, and the African continent have been anything but strangers to Europeans. Focus on the last 500 years and their being long-time acquaintances is even more evident in coloniality. That is, the juridical architecture capital put in place to facilitate and protect access to the commodities, lands, and labor needed for subsistence and growth found outside of Europe. For almost 200 years, the colonial juridic architecture has been joined by an ethical framework, the political symbolic tools of raciality. That is, the arsenal of knowledge that has named and explained the mental, moral, and intellectual by linking them to physical characteristics, thereby providing justification for conquest, enslavement, and imprisonment. For this reason, it is interesting that when writing about an earlier iteration of what has been called the refugee crisis, Jacques Derrida chose to take duty as the ethical descriptor for hospitality, absolute hospitality, and to present that figure of an absolute, nameless, homeless, other, levinas autrui, which remains without representation as the one to whom it applies. It is as if even the demand for legal or moral obligation, deontological, to hospitality to the racial other is something unthinkable and unwritable as a philosophical exercise, even though when writing about hospitality, Derrida was referring to the others of Europe for whom he charged cities of refuge ought to be built. As he was doing so, Kantian moral philosophy helped, as its non-commitment to external causes and consequences did not clash with the choice to not foreground coloniality and raciality. Yes, so I end
Thank
the
you.
reading here.
Thank you to you, Riza, reading, but also to Denise, who again was so generous to participate and contribute to our project. That time, already actually in a virtual way, because I remember she connected via Skype, and this time, yeah, with real pages. So it's probably even more real now. To continue in this flow and to continue thinking about inhospitality, we thought of introducing you to another text that is in the book, but that was also present in one of the day of the invocations. That is the one by Ulfa Minde and Miriam Schickler, and also by Foundation Class, that is entitled The Foundation Class Non-Cafeteria of the Academy of Mystery, beautifully rendered here in the book with all the notes. And as you can see, it was thought as a situation with 4 voices, but then became with 3 voices plus many resonances. And we thought of replaying here just a very short bit of this performance that was actually the opening performance of our invocations, and that was staged as a reception dinner in different voices, where actually we were also called to sit at that table and to question the role of the different participants in an operation of hospitality. There is the one of the institution. In that case, I guess we were there to be troubled. The one of the servant, the one of the guest, and the one of the uninvited. So to continue also thinking along the reflections of Denise, we would like exactly to play the moment in which a voice from the outside, this voice of the uninvited, comes in and
disrupt the dinner, no?
And actually does also some sort of accusations towards the host, and is complicating and troubling, yes, the whole setting. So we want to go.
Yes, let's go together.
Okay, I am going down, and here I am. Ecco Raisa che arriva. Are you coming, Raisa?
Yeah, I'm here on the left
go
side.
and play the video from minute 22:38 seconds.
So who's thee? Who's we? Who is this we?
Knock, knock. Who's there? The other. The other who? The absolutely other. The other you expect not to be expecting. The other you're not waiting for. The uninvited. My admission to this space is confined through rules that confirm your authority. You can only invite me if you categorize me down, narrow me down, so that I can fulfill your expectations, so that I can fill the seat that you assign to me, so I'm socially acceptable and not too disturbing, nor too discordant. Am I too much? Am I too much? Am I too long? Too many? Too subversive? Too voluble? Too insistent? Too loud? Too strident? Too much? Too loud? Too complex? Too hybrid? Too convoluted? Too disrespectful? Too irreducible? Too antagonistic? Too insistent? 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 Too repetitive? Too paranoid? Too subversive? Too hybrid? Too strident? Too much? Too much? Too paranoid, too excessive. But I'm not one, and neither are you. Border is a verb, and my claim of exclusion is not unidirectional. Border plus 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 border equates to many borders. Borders, in plural, anxieties, compounded. Uninvited, I'm the void you cannot fill but with your cheap singular speculations. Uninvited, you cannot point me to my seat, so for now I shall occupy all of them. We won't be assigned to our seats. Are you reconsidering your uninvitation now?
So we play the video, and it's just a 30-second last extract.
We are already here. We have been here all this time. We preceded you. We preceded your knowledge. Our absence was never a deviation from our presence. The impossibilities that make up our experiences create the conditions for all that is possible. This is not an intellectual exercise.
So with these questions that are thrown into the room by this voice of an uninvited guest, we want to go back to the book and to one of the fundamental chapters that are unfolding in the project and in the book, and it's the one on the phantom limb. So the one on Heimat. This was actually exactly the first big getting together with friends and thinkers and activists trying to interrogate possibility of de-heimatizing certain narratives and understanding this mathematics of amputation, of division, and instead thinking through possibilities, as Arjuna Padurai is going to explain later, of addition and multiplication of voices, perspectives, and of citizenship as well. So this long night of ideas that actually happened on the 1st of June in 2018 saw the participation of people like Arjun, who gave a brilliant keynote, of Bilgin Ayata, who actually was the first one to really formulate this question about the de-heimatization and also making proposals and unfolding strategies to do that. And Vasilis Tsianos, another friend of us, and then also the great and incredible Margarita Zomu, who all together sat in the Kuppelhalle of Silent Green and discussed with us for hours and after their presentations. Yes. We have the pleasure, yes, Raisa, to you.
Yeah, I would say we hear some words about the concept of caressing the phantom limb, Heimat, progression, regression, stagnation, which is the concept Bonaventure wrote for this first invocation on Heimat and homeland. So we can move to where Juana's video is, and let's go this way.
I think no, this is the other one. I have to move here. I guess I host. Who is the host? Yes, I'm here.
Caressing the phantom limb. Heimat, progression, regression, stagnation. Heimat ist, was man nicht ertragen kann, wenn man dort ist, und nicht loslassen kann, wenn man weg ist. Hetta Müller, Lesung im LTB am 11.11.2009. In Oluguibe's seminal essay, Imaginary Homes, Imagined Loyalties, a brief reflection on the uncertainty of geographies, 1998, he writes that, and I quote, "Our bond with the site of our nativity is a one-way affair. It is an ambivalent bond born out of a one-sided loyalty and a proclivity to possess, a desperate striving to belong, to lay claim to something that lays no claim in return. Severed from the womb and the body that bore us and hauled into the void of life and existence, we crave to attach ourselves to something, a moment, a location, an event. We crave an anchor which we readily find in the contours of the house of our upbringing, in the streets of our childhood, in the city of our birth. But the city has a different desire and a different response, for we need the city more than the city needs us." End of quote. Oguibe's observations resonate with novelist and poet Hetta Müller's comments that Heimat is what one can't stand when one is there and cannot let go of when one is away. The reverse to this seems to be true, which is to say that if Germans are in their Heimat but still feel a loss of that Heimat, then maybe that thing called Heimat is already long gone, never ever really existed, or was long lost as early as birth or a gain of consciousness. The relationship between most peoples, not only in Germany, to their Heimat seems to be like the relationship between an amputee and his or her amputated limb. This very complicated relationship is one furnished with the sentimentality and denial of loss, or sheer longing for something inexistent. Just like with the phantom limb syndrome, whereby individuals with an amputation experience pains, twitches, itches, and other sensations in their missing limb, or other amputated body parts, the call for an increased identification with Heimat seems like caressing a phantom limb. And to close with Oluguibe, I quote, "The conviction that we own the city, that in losing our place to others or to distance, we lose that which belongs to us, that to which we have an exclusive right, derives in no small measure from the wish not to compete for the attention of something whose love we crave, but fear, even know that it does not love us back. It is as much a craving to own as it is an appeal to be owned. And as for the city, so for country. In time, the apprehension transforms into a romantic longing in the hold of which we are blinded to the specifics of our relationship. Everything takes a different hue. The ugly turns unique, the trivial symbolic. We argue the illogical, defend the indefensible, stake out the frontiers and keep out others. We weep at the sound of the anthem and worship the flag. We descend to the habit of kissing the earth. There is no love more blind than the love of country. End of quote. No matter how much one caresses the phantom limb, it doesn't become more real than the imagination of it.
As you mentioned before, Elena, we had the immense honor to have Arjuna Padurai, a friend of Savi, very kind, has been with us all these years. And also one of the latest news is that Savi is hosting Arjun's library of more than 4,000 books.
Yes, hosting
yes.
and not ghosting. So making it available for the public, for the Savis, the Savi friends, and making these books being real and alive as they are, obviously. So thank you, Arjun, for the immense generosity that you always show towards us.
Yes.
Raisa.
And yeah, so for the Caressing the Phantom Limb, Arjun contributed with an essay that is called the Phantom Heimat, in which he says 8 theses that can be also understood as arguments, thinking around the topic of Heimat, which is a German term that can be translated as homeland. I will maybe read 4 of them to have like an idea of the thesis. So thesis 1, because the nation is an entirely imagined agency, it is capable of doing the most unimaginable things. Thesis 2, when the phantom limb is a stranger, the migrant, the minor, all politics is the politics of amputation. Thesis 3, it is the sacrifice of the stranger that establishes the sacredness of the community. And thesis 4, it is widely assumed that nations produce violence through war, repression, and conquest. But an equal truth is that it is violence through which the effect of nationhood is produced. So a topic that is more than actual today, and especially because of that, we asked Arjun to share with us his thoughts on this essay that he wrote in 2018 and to contextualize it today. And what this text and what this reflection of Heimat, of nation and home can say to us nowadays. So let's go.
Yes, we move down in the garden as we move in the book.
Yes.
Here, Arjun.
So here we are.
Yep. And we play it together, okay? Are you there, Raisa?
Okay. Yes.
I played. Okay, 1, 2, and we played. Go.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to reflect a bit on my contribution to this book, but also to thank the whole Savvy team for stimulating this discussion, which has always been a very important problem created by modern nationalism, but is now having a kind of second or eighth or ninth or 10th life, both in Germany and, alas, in many, many countries in the world where the widely noted swing to the right is frequently accompanied by a return of ideas of the homeland or some equivalent of Heimat in other languages, which is exclusionary, which involves what I would call subtraction. In other words, minusing or subtracting different kinds of individuals, different kinds of groups, different kinds of human beings in order to make the homeland more hospitable to the people who are supposed to belong in it. And eventually there is a very peculiar idea in this subtraction process, because it takes the body, the living body of any territory or any soil or any country, and tries to subtract from it the things that are somehow not belonging to make what remains more pure, more whole, more authentic, and more legitimate. And finally, if you push this logic to the extreme, the Heimat will actually become the Heim. That is to say, only maybe two parents and a child will belong to the Heimat, and maybe eventually the child will be removed because the child is somehow imperfect, and then next in order the woman will be removed because she's also imperfect, and will leave a man, a one-person Heimat of a single male. So subtraction is not a good logic for any civil society, any group, any territory. So if we don't have subtraction, where do we go? So I would say hospitality should be about addition. So hospitality should be about openness, so that the home is a gateway to an open space, not a fence around which a small number of people is gathered, so that by openness, of course, in making addition, or you could even say multiplication, the principle of the Heimat, rather than subtraction, or division, me against you, white against black. So you can use simple arithmetic and say subtraction and division are not good things from the point of view of my values. Addition and multiplication. But multiplication can be very scary, so let's simply say addition. And the question then becomes why and how can we have an idea of home, but which is actually hospitable and open? One of the troubles with hospitality as an idea, of course, hospitality is a very dangerous thing because actually you're hostile to your guest. But even hospitality, where you are warm and welcoming, makes a difference between the host and the guest. And the main thing about the guest is temporary. That's why we call Gastarbeiter, means please go back when you have finished cleaning our roads and our latrines and this and that, then you go back to Turkey or Syria or North Africa or wherever and leave the Heim to us. So even the strong idea of hospitality has some difficulty in it because it distinguishes host and guest, and hosts are permanent, and those hosts keep having to subtract. So at the end, there's only one host left and maybe two guests, and those guests are temporary. So it's not a very good logic. So we need another model, although I certainly think being hospitable, even on a temporary basis, is better than hostipitality, meaning better than hostility, but still hospitality is always a temporary thing, it's a temporary measure. We need to think of things which are more permanently open, arrangements, which are more permanently open to addition and multiplication. So the minute we say that, so that we don't end up subtracting more and more and end up with 1 or 0, that is, empty homeland is therefore becomes the perfect homeland, where there is nobody. So if we don't want that, and we want to prefer addition and multiplication rather than subtraction and division, there are two issues at least. One is the issue of why is addition good? I'm happy. I have people at my home whom I like. Why should I add? Well, the answer is because in addition or multiplication lies diversity. And the next question is, why should I care about diversity? Why do I need more languages, more colors, more skins, more races, more styles? Because, in my view, that addition of difference, which is what diversity is about, in a living environment guarantees greater sustainability in the long run than simple uniformity. Simple uniformity usually means that when something changes in the environment, you are very brittle and you might disappear. But if you have many faces, many forms, many colors, many rhythms, it's much more likely that you can sustain that over the long run. So cultural diversity for me is a little bit like biological diversity. It is part of a fundamental health, sustainability, creativity. That's a long argument, but I want to indicate that that is a simple answer, though it's not simple in real life, because people still think that sticking with what you know and what you have is safer. So people have to be, all of us need to be educated in why taking the risk of adding diversity is actually not a real risk. Actually, it's a form of security for our long-term viability as a society, a country, or even a species. But that argument would take a long time. I'll leave it there. Then the question is how? After all, we need borders. We can't let everybody in. What if somebody wants to come in and kill us off? What if somebody is carrying a deadly disease, as we know now with COVID? We have to have some capacity to make boundaries. And once you have a boundary, we all tend to make the boundary rigid and make it permanent, and then we are back in the subtraction game. We have the fixed Heimat, the door is closed, no more room, stay out, etc. How to have boundaries without that? Well, one general direction would be to make the boundaries temporary and functional. Boundary for COVID, boundary for this, boundary for that. Not a permanent line in the sand with barbed wire and guards and fences and passports and visas. It's not a simple thing to do, but we know we've done it with COVID. Today we can have tourists, tomorrow we not. This is temporary. So it's a flexible temporary business, and I don't see why that cannot be done with all sorts of borders for all sorts of reasons. And so I will come now to conclude my short remarks by saying, since we are talking of limbs and phantoms and Heimats, that I suggest that the best way to make the Heimat a phantom, rather than a limb which gets smaller and smaller and smaller, is to make the border a phantom, which is temporary, comes and goes, a ghost. Not unreal, but a temporary thing for some purpose, which then goes when it is not needed. So rather than make the Heimat a phantom, let us make the border a phantom. So these are my thoughts for today to perhaps contextualize or slightly play off the remarks in my written contribution. So on that note, I will stop with many thanks to all of you at SAN. So I would like to add a comment connecting these remarks that I have just made to my written contribution in this book. Today I have used a kind of arithmetic metaphor, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, but in my written contribution I use a slightly different approach, which is having to do with amputation, with surgery. And I have had a kind of long-term interest in the way in which minorities, refugees, other undesirable people in many societies are in a way treated as a medical problem. They are treated as people we must investigate or diagnose to understand who are they and who are we. And I have written in the past often to say that ethnocidal, genocidal violence is often not just about removing or killing or destroying the other, but also about looking inside, kind of examining in the way that somebody who does vivisection opens up the human body to examine what makes them other, and therefore what makes us us. So it's the problem, the anxiety is about myself. What makes me a Hindu rather than a Muslim? What makes me a German rather than a Turk, let's say? This becomes a diagnostic problem, and this diagnostic, medical, or dark scientific logic can lead to the logic of amputation. That is, you cut the part off, a surgical strategy. So you remove the arm, you remove some dimension of the person and do subtraction, as it were, in a surgical manner until you have the body you want. But then the part that you have cut off often leads up a phantom life. This we know from people who have amputations. They feel pain in the leg, though the leg is gone. And all societies that perform these surgical operations and amputate the bodies of migrants, refugees, and other aliens always continue to feel the pain. And they may name the pain in some other way, to say that the pain is really about the economy, or the pain is about our sense of security, or the pain is about terror. But truly the pain is because you cut something out, thinking it was the problem. But that act of amputation actually diminished your own sense of humanity. And that diminished sense of humanity is what is causing you to suffer. So what you need to know is that is the reason you're suffering, not because somebody took away your jobs, or somebody polluted your environment, or somebody produced terrorism in your midst. It's because you diminished your own humanity, and in surgically removing a part of your own body or heart or home, you produced a incurable state of reduction, of subtraction, and therefore of pain. Therefore, all these mathematical things are also connected to medical things. They all have to do with what happens when you try to achieve purity through reduction rather than health through addition. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Arjun. It's always absolutely illuminating to listen to your very dense reflections, that this time were also dressed in mathematical reasonings. So now we would like to enter the second space of contemplation in our book. That is the one about guesting and hosting. Who is the ghost in this process of hospitality? In this chapter, we are reasoning together with musicians like Kursil and philosophers also like Kursil, activists and curators and artists like Tanya Villard or Peter Morin, sisters like Jihan El-Tahri and Raisa Galofre. We're reasoning about alienation, about dispossession, and about the violence that is enacted in any process of transmutation of the host to guest and vice versa. So what we've been trying to look at is not only the evidence of this violence, but also the process itself, the process of zombification, we could say, of rendering the guest an enemy or making him feel like he's too much. That's what Arjun was saying when he was mentioning the Gastarbeiter, that once they have finished performing their work, they are asked to please go back after having cleaned everything or repaired our things, are invited to leave. That's also part of the invitation to come to our fortress Europe. So to start introducing this long chapter, I would like to mention just one text, and it's the one by Tanya Villard. And I would like to do that because Tanya was so kind to be with us tonight again, and not only to reflect about this zombification process that happens when somebody is invited to come to a land and then is rendered a ghost, but also is shedding light to this alienation process that is performed in these societies who have been made guests in their own home. And that's of course what happens with indigenous population that have been stolen from their resources, from their land even, and be also deprived of their labor and their existence. I would like, before playing the video of Tanya, I would like to read a little bit from her bio and let you know who Tanya is for those who are not familiar. Tanya is a Sekvipimek nation. She works within shifting ideas of the contemporary and the traditional as they relate to cultural arts and production, often working with bodies of knowledge and skills that are conceptually linked to her interest in intersections between Aboriginal and other culture. She has worked as curator in residence with different galleries, and she has been touring into in national exhibitions at Vancouver Art Gallery, and she's also very close to Denise and to the Art Gallery. So in this text that we publish here, that is entitled "The Ghost Face Brothers, Nationalism and Colonialism," she reasons around this ethnographic framing of hospitality, and she really talks from the positionality of being an indigenous woman and standing in solidarity with migrants and refugees and fighting the violence of the system of injustice and oppression that are performed in the everyday. Let's listen to Tanya.
This is a characterization of the face of colonialism, the ghost face of the guest. These people wish to be partners in our country. We must therefore be the same as brothers to them and live as one family. We will share equally in everything, half and half, water, timber, etc. What is ours will be theirs, and what is theirs will be ours. We will help each other to be great and good. The ghost face is the face that devours. The true identity of the ghost face has become known. This is not a guest that has arrived to be grateful for hospitality or to honor the host with the good relations. This is the devourer. They have stolen our lands and everything on them, and continue same for their own purposes. They treat us less than children. They say that the Indians know nothing and own nothing, yet their power and wealth has come from our belongings. The Queen's Law, which we believe guaranteed us our rights, the British Columbia government has trampled underfoot. These ghost faces have boots, jack boots. This is how our guests have treated us, the brothers we received hospitably in our house. This memorial quoted above was read out loud by Chief Louis Kukpi, who was an important land rights chief and who was also a subject in the anthropological record of Shuswap or Secwepemc people. Chief Louis was photographed and subject to physical anthropology in 1897, having a facial cast made of him and deposited in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City in America. This measurement, an anthropological study, was part of the North Pacific Jessup expedition, whose leading anthropologist was the German-American Franz Boas, the father of American anthropology. The practice of physical anthropology was motivated by ideas of salvage anthropology, and the anthropometrics and facial casts that were collected from indigenous peoples in British Columbia were made to preserve the facial characteristics of the vanishing race of indigenous peoples. This vanishing race was also to become an active ingredient in the branding of the West. It became the subject of many advertising campaigns and nationalist agendas in the Americas, making the culture of indigenous peoples an artifact of the Americas and usurping power both through its active denial and suppression of land rights, as well as its simultaneous appropriation of indigenous culture, drained of indigenous politics and bodies within a stolen land. But this is not just the case of Chief Louis as a victim, though he was lied to in the process of the anthropological study, and ancestral remains were taken from our community without our consent during the expedition by another anthropologist. His cast now stands as a demonstration of agency. Kukstam, thank you, Savi, for the opportunity to contribute and to link the history here of my land, Milch and Sokwatmach Utluch, Sokwatmach land and space, with these histories that intersect as they do with Germany and with German anthropologists.
Raisa, we wanted to say some words about Sophia. Maybe we can say them now after this intensity.
Yes, so we continue to navigate a chapter, I host Who's the Ghost, and also thinking about the question of home, of belonging. We had the pleasure to have Sophia Sinclair, the great poet, Sophia Sinclair, to be with us during the Invocations in 2018, and this was also amazing. It was incredible, her performance. And for this book launch, we would like to revive these moments and let her read her poems that you can find some of them, of course, in the book. So yeah, let's listen to Sophia.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a reading of poems from my debut collection called Cannibal. And the book is called Cannibal because of the linguistic history of the word. The word cannibal is the English variant of the Spanish word canibal, which comes from the word caribal, a reference to the native Carib people whom Columbus thought ate human flesh, and from whom the word Caribbean originates. So, by virtue of being Caribbean, all West Indian people like me are already, in a purely linguistic sense, born savage. This is home. Have I forgotten it? Wild conch shell dialect, black apostrophe curled tight on my tongue, or how the Spanish built walls of broken glass to keep me out, but the doctor bird kept chasing and raking me in. This place is your place, wreathed in red sargassum, ancient driftwood nursed on the pensive sea, the ramshackle altar I visited often, packed full with fish skull, bright with lignum vitae plumes. Father, I have asked so many miracles of it, to be patient and forgiving, to be remade for you in some small wonder. And what a joy to still believe in anything. My diction now as straight as my hair, that stranger we've long stopped searching for. But if somehow our half-sunken hearts could answer, I would cup my mouth in warm bowls over the earth and kiss the wet dirt of home taste, bogue, mud, and one long orange peel for skin. I'd open my ear for sugar cane and long stalks of gungo peas to climb in. I'd swim the sea, still lapsing in its sodded frame, the sea that again and again calls out my name. You can clap if the spirit moves you to clap, it's all right. I saw someone over here stifling a clap. No, I like, poetry to not be like we're at a funeral. Supposed to feel it, right? Especially if you have the rhythm in you, like Caribbean people and other people from the diaspora. This next poem is called Pocomania, and it's based on a Jamaican folk religion that involves dancing and chanting as a way of communing with the past and with the dead, and it's a female-centered religion. And so in this poem, I tried to embody the rhythm and tempo of the Pocomania ritual. Pocomania. Father unbending, Father unbroken, Father with the low-hanging belly, Father I was cleaved from, pressed into, cast and remolded, Father I was forged in the fire of yourself. Ripped my vein skin, one eyelid, Father, my black tangle of hair and teeth. Born yellowed and wrinkled, Father, your jackfruit foster my overripe flesh. Father, your first daughter now severed at the ankles, Father, your black machete. I remember your slick smell, your sea dark, your rum froth, wailed and smeared my wet jelly across your cheek. Father, forgive my impossible demands. I conjure you in woven tam, Lion of Judah. Father, your red, gold, and green. Father, a flag I am waving. Father, a flag I am burning. Father, skittering in on a boat of whale skeleton, his body wrapped in white like an Orthodox priest. Father and his nest of acolyte women, his beard comber, his primrose, his dahlia, his Nagasaki blossom. Mother and I were none of them. Father, washing me in eucalyptus, in garlic, in golden seal. Father, fathering my exorcism. Father, the harsh brine of my sea, making sounds only the heart can feel. Father, a burrowing insect, his small incision, no bleat, but a warm gurgle. Daughter, entering this world, a host. Father, your beach animal, your lamentations in the sand. Mother, her red bones come knocking. Mother, her red bones come knocking at the floorboards. My mother knocking at his skull when he dreams. Scratching at your door, my dry rattle of Morse code. Father, let me in. With the mash-mouth spirits who enter us, Father, the split fibula where the marrow must rust. Father, the soft drum in my ear. Daughter unweeding her familiar mischief. Mother jangling the rib cage. I am here. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So we are getting towards the end, letting the last few contributions manifesting themselves in the third chapter of our book. That is the one on Hostipitality. We're sorry for the neologism and the coining of terms that is constant at Savi, but we all know we need to find new vocabularies and new terms to think together and to think beyond certain structures. What we meant with Hostipicapitalism and riding the tide of Hostipicapitalism was reflecting on the pervasiveness of this condition and reflecting on the commodification of hospitality, the touristification of that and the economicalization also of this process that are obviously in our societies also merchandised, marketed, and that are not anymore leaving us space to think about the real gesture of unconditional hospitality and letting, being ready to share without any advantage that you're getting at the end. In this chapter, we decided to feature three very poignant texts. One that is a contribution by Joshua Chambers-Latson. He was a lecture, but also again a more performative intervention that was guiding us backward into time from 2019 to 1971, 1931, 11, 1888, 1850, thinking about slave ships, and the title of it was My Last American Dollar. Then we also had a meaningful text by Lionel Manga, who is yes, in conversation with us since a while, and let's say it's a dear friend also and brother of Bonaventure, that is entitled Knocking on Heaven's Door. But to end, and we tonight have the pleasure to hear him in this common garden, we also managed for the first time to get Mohammed Amjadi in the room during our invocations, but also to publish and translate a quite relevant piece entitled Among Whites, What It Means to Be Privileged. So what it means and also how to unlearn the privilege. Mohammed is going to introduce himself, actually. Doesn't need maybe also too much presentation, but what is fundamental in his reading that he's going to do tonight is really addressing the politics of being seen as subjects in a context as the German one that he knows very well as a journalist and as an activist as well, I would say. So let's listen to Mohammed. I'm coming here next to the video. Raisa, you're also there.
Hello,
and
my name is Mohammed Amjahid. I'm a journalist and book author from Berlin in investigative journalism. I focus on police brutality, on right-wing extremism and other topics. As a book author, I focus on anti-racist discourses in the German-speaking context. And my new book just appeared, Der weiße Fleck, eine Anleitung zu antirassistischem Denken, at the Piper Publishing House, where I try to give new input for the anti-racist discourse in Germany. However, I'm so glad to be part of the new project of Salve Contemporary with a translation from my first book, Unter Weißen, was es heißt, privilegiert zu sein, Among Whites, What It Means to Be Privileged. And I will read you part of it, and I hope you like it. Here we go. I once interviewed the Easter Bunny in 2014. Alright, it was a mini jobber that dressed up as an Easter Bunny and performed at company parties in Berlin. During our conversation, he described to me how he sometimes sprung out of huge cakes in his bunny costume. So it was for sure a harmless interview amidst the new slump of the holiday season. Nevertheless, concerned citizens filled up my inbox with their ridicule and racism. How dare a Muslim besmirch a symbol of the Occident? Just the supposition from looking at the author line, for example, that a text may not be from a white male author makes some readers livid. As already suggested, this opposition does not only come from the outside, as illustrated by 4 small scenes from my own journalistic career. First, hurdles before kickoff. In 2009, while at a Lefty Daily, I was greeted with "Hello Ahmadinejad." A department head, a perfect stranger to me, referred to me with what the officially chosen leader of the axis of evil at the time was called. It was my first day as a trainee. Shortly thereafter, the man sat down with me and quizzed me on my capabilities. We were going to discuss what themes I would take on, which reports, or what kind of research I could support, or so I thought. It proceeded differently, since he opened the conversation as follows. Where did you learn to speak such good German? And more importantly, is your written German as good as your spoken German? We recently had an intern with a veil. Her writing was not so good. I did not like her style, so now I have become more careful about having foreigners in my department. He spoke fast and breathlessly and without breath. Welcome to the left-wing press, I thought to myself, silent and astonished. Second, discrimination in everyday working life. A couple of years later, at a big local newspaper, a colleague referred to me as a hipster Salafist in the corridor. Up until that point, I had not had much to do with the editor in question. And then our paths crossed in front of the elevator. He took in the combination of my orange trouser and turquoise shirt and spontaneously called me a Salafist. A day prior to that, there had been a commentary in the paper demanding tougher measures against Salafist imams in Germany. Third, lack of appreciation for diversity. In the open plan office of another newspaper, colleagues complained after I had held a telephone conversation with someone from Iraq for an article. Could you please not hold phone conversations in foreign languages in here? It bothers me. German is fine, English too, but if it's Chinese, Turkish, or even Arabic, I simply can't concentrate on my own work. From then on, I took the phone calls that I could not hold in German or English in the offices of colleagues who happened to be away on holiday. I had to hide myself in order to work. Fourth, fear of the advancement of the new kid on the block. In yet another editorial department, I was addressed by an executive editor at the urinal. I was just zipping my trousers shut as the elderly gentleman next to me suddenly said, "Ah, you are the new Arab. Come to my office sometime. I'd like to explain a few things to you." A few days later, his secretary served us coffee and he talked my ears full on why the essence of the Arab was not compatible with the Western concept of democracy. However, he intimated that it was certainly practical to have someone like me on the editorial team because we can make good use of you and we can make good use of you for our aims, he said. When I asked him whom he meant with we, the conversation was suddenly over. In my first book, but also my second book, I criticize the white knowledge production. I criticize spaces with white dominance and how black folks and people of color can empower themselves to just be seen as subjects in the German context or white majority societies. So this is why I'm so happy that part of my texts got translated into English. So thank you for that, Savvy Contemporary. And I hope to see you soon after the pandemic in person. See you, bye-bye.
Thank you. Actually, we are the one who have to thank you, Mohammed, for your beautiful text and your participation and your explication of all this everydayness of oppression and difficulties by living in Germany. Raisa, we are going to the top again.
We are moving again.
Yes, and we have to wrap it up and to give the many thanks that we have to give. Would you like to start or should we start? Yes.
Sure. Well, we would like to thank again, of course, all the contributors who kindly, share with us their texts, their thoughts, their ideas, and also we would like to thank again the people who make this possible. For example, like Federica Boetti, Elsa Westreiche, Clara Brand, Lila Di Vela, Archive Appendix, Chiara Onestini, Chiara Figone, of course, and yes, Monilola Ilupeyu, who also works in the proofreading of the book, and of course, all the Savis that supported the project back in 2018 and are still supporting us right now in the technical production of these book launches. So we thank a lot to Juan Pablo Garcia Sosa for designing the gardens of the 4 books, and Abhishek Nilamber for being there to record and take care of all the technical difficulties during this recording, and we appreciate your patience and work. And also a very special thank to Constant Doulard for providing and welcoming us in this platform.
Yes.
So. Mm-hmm.
No, I also want to thank Abby and Juan that actually have been made ghosts, even if they're really the host of this event. They are in the background, but there are also many other people in the background here that are mounting a show, that have been cooking, that have been coming in with many smiles, and also sometimes with many problems, because this is what it is to run an art space like Savi. So that's also because of you buying the books that we managed to exist, not just because of the economics that is behind it, but because of the circulation of ideas and of thoughts that this will enhance. So thank you for being with us.
We will, of course, want to thank the funders of the
important
Hostipitality project in general, and also the funders of the book. This book project was funded by the Torn Fund of the German Federal Cultural Foundation, and the Hostipitality project is part of a bigger program connecting different institutions around the European Union, and this program is Forces from Conflict to Conviviality through Creativity and Culture, which is co-founded by the Creative Europe program. Also, we'd like to thank the Embassy of Canada, who supported us in the exhibition and invocations, and of course our collaborator and friend Denise Reiner on our gallery in Vancouver.
We end again listening to the resonances and the echoes of the Hostipitality Suite by Jacques Courcil, performed together with Mark Gilmore. And this is gonna stay with us and can continue to stay with us also if you get the album at Savi and you play that in your houses.
Thank you for being with us today. See you around in Savi.
Soon. Ciao.
Yes.